And Bobby, you're on mute, just so you know.
All right, I'm going to jump in. Thank you, folks, for attending. And this is a two-part session. So we're going to have tonight, and we'll get to where we get to right around, well, it's 5 o'clock for us, so just after 6 o'clock. And then we'll take some questions, and then we'll pick it up in 2 weeks again on February 4th, same time. And I am just really thrilled in this case. As you can see the title there, Advocating for Twice Exceptional Children, a pretty big topic, but I'm really thrilled to have both Bobby Gilman and Kathy Kearney to join us, and they have some really, really important information. As I said in the email, I'm going to do some general information up front, and I apologize for some of you that have already seen some of this stuff, but it's always a good reminder to go through why our kids are the way they are in a sense, and so you'll have to bear with me on that one. And then Bobby and Kathy have some very specific information with some case studies and this and that, the other, that hopefully will really open your eyes in terms of how to really get down and deep in terms of advocating through civil rights, through IEPs, 504s, using the tools you have available at your disposal to really, and it's not to be contesting your school districts every single time, but it is to make sure that they are doing the right thing for your child. And there is actually quite a bit that you can do to make sure that your son or daughter is getting the right type of accommodation, support, and education in general, so that they will be successful in school. So I think most of you already know who I am, so I'm not going to do any introductions for myself. You can always ask me or send me an email if you don't. But Bobby, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and maybe you can introduce Kathy for us too, if she's not there.
I will do that. Welcome, everyone. I'm Bobby Gilman. I'm the Associate Director at the Gifted Development Center in Westminster, Colorado. We do a lot of testing of gifted and twice exceptional children and advocacy and research. Kathy Kearney is presenting with me tonight, and she's a teacher, a gifted specialist teacher in the Maine public schools. So I always like presenting with her because I have one point of view and she has another, although she's as fine a tester as I've ever worked with as well. So we welcome you tonight.
All right. Thanks, Bobby. And we're going to start jumping into this. And again, we ask not only for recording, but for our flow of speaking, that you save your questions until we are finished. And we'll see how this flow goes. As you know, I'm pretty casual with this stuff. So Bobby and Kathy will probably, well, they may jump in my slides, and I might even jump in on theirs. But that's kind of how we flow. And without further ado, let us jump in. Remember, put your questions. I would actually recommend you write them down in a notebook or something first. And then once we're done, stick them in the chat box or the other one, the question box. That way we can kind of keep track of which questions are coming in first so that we can answer them in order. All right, moving forward. So those are our introductions. So I can skip this slide. And then why the struggle? And I know some of you already know this, but it really comes down to asynchrony in terms of atypical neurodevelopment. And you probably heard me on this one. If you haven't, Dr. Matt Zakreski and I did a full webinar just on the 2E brain and atypical neurodevelopment. And the bottom line is it comes down to this. I'm not going to dwell too much in depth in this, but it comes down to the fact that twice exceptional children have, and I'll show you the slide in a bit, they have what we call larger arousal meters, so sensory input valves. And they bring in tons of information much more quickly than other kids do. In fact, there's one of the slides I show you is an image of the arousal meter or the sensory input valve of a Asperger's young person compared to that of an average typical kid. And it's almost twice as size, it's twice as big, twice as dense. So what that's telling us is that information through sensory processing, so taste and touch and smell and feeling and all that stuff, is coming in at a much more rapid pace. Now, what we found also is that the further you are from the norm in terms of, you know, if you want to use an IQ scale, you may. We know that's controversial, but the bottom line is the further you are from the norm in terms of development, the more information, the more sensitive those pieces are. And so they're bringing in more and more and more information. Now, what we found with twice exceptional kids is that some of that information can be a little bit twisted, meaning the white matter we found actually, which is the receptive tissue that's coming in and sending messages for every other part of the brain, of which we know of at least 180 separate pieces or separate portions in terms of the cortical index, is sometimes twisted. So sometimes it's sending the wrong types of messages, AKA why we sometimes see twice exceptional kids struggle. Now, and the other piece to that is because these sensory prints can be so intense, they can overwhelm an already intensive limbic system. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. So what we see inconsistent because of asynchronous development, meaning their social and emotional skills and development is lagging behind their intellectual development. Because of this, we see inconsistencies in our kids, especially our 2E kids in terms of performance. And a lot of that too, and Bobby and Kathy could talk to this a little bit, is what we see with a lot of twice exceptional kids is real strengths and then encapsulated with real weaknesses or challenges or disabilities even. And so the kids tend to move towards their strengths in terms of their interests and what they want to do and what they're interested in. So we see lots of inconsistent performance in the areas of strength and then real consistency in the areas of weakness. And what they tend to do is camouflage those inconsistencies, those deficits in a sense, because they're so smart, because they're so intelligent, they find ways around the system. They find ways to camouflage, and so that they don't get identified. When they don't get identified, they have other struggles in class, and many cases, they end up being identified as either having social and emotional issues, behavior issues, et cetera, because they're adapting, and they're adapting in the only way they know how. Right. So that's where the camouflage comes in. The second part, as they get older, is they have this existential angst in a sense of starting to feel different from other kids their age. And when that happens, they also camouflage in a sense because they don't want to appear different. So they'll try their best to keep up the face, so to speak. But the problem is, as the workload gets heavier, as school gets a little bit more difficult, those cracks start to show and that camouflage starts to fall away. And then we see kids that are really struggling because by the time they get to middle school and high school, they've already developed a whole new sense of self, a whole new metacognition about who they are. And in that sense, sometimes that is not always very positive. And so that's where we have folks like Bobby and Kathy come in and Summit Center and all these other places to help out our kids work together to really find a sense of self and metacognition, which in turn can translate into being more successful as a student. So if you develop a proper positive schema about who you are, even though you're twice exceptional, you will do much better in school and you will be able to advocate for yourself in school. Right. I always use examples of my own kids, and you guys are probably sick of that by now. But a perfect example of that is our son, Sean, who is Asperger's and is now 23 years old. He really struggled in school to the point where we actually pulled him out at ninth grade. He ended up finishing his GED, not without struggle. But now he's learned who he is, and he really feels accepting of himself. What that has done, in essence, is it has allowed him to advocate for who he is. So now he's taking college courses. He talks to his professors ahead of time and he talks to them about Asperger's and what that means. And for his case, what that means is he can't take notes and listen at the same time. So he asks for copies of notes and he asks for accommodations beforehand. And most professors are very willing to accommodate because guess what? He's a 99.8% GPA average in college. Compare that to his traveling through school and his journey through school, where it was all over the place, up and down, high in one area and very low in other areas. It's almost a miracle, right? So then the other problem is we're dealing with myths. You would not believe how many schools that I still work with that have no idea what twice exceptionality actually even means. We hear that it can't even exist. How can two beings, in a sense, how can someone with such inconsistencies, such discrepancy exist in one person? Well, they can, as you all know. And we also see that instead of actually looking at the issues and challenging, working on their strengths and challenging their strengths through their weaknesses, we see, um, educators sometimes blame them in terms of, oh, they're just lazy. Oh, they can't do the work. Oh, this, that, or the other. And so they look at it in terms of, oh, it's just a behavioral issue, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we're still battling that thing in terms of the myths that are out there in regards to twice exceptional students. And that in turn adds layers to the asynchrony, to the neurodevelopment, to the consistency, and to the camouflaging. So all those myths actually serve, in a sense, to really go against what our kids are, trying to be successful in school. Then there's the fatigue factor. And I talk about the fatigue factor because I see so many of our twice exceptional students in school code switching back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, meaning that they are putting up some kind of front in terms of who they would like to be or who they want the teacher to see in terms of the school. And then they're getting home and they're exploding because they can't hold it in that long. That in turn, over time, produces a lot of fatigue. And we had some issues with our own kids in terms of fatigue. And sometimes they just need time to recover. So that's the other piece. That fatigue can, in turn, influence that struggle in school because they always seem like they're out of place, always seem like they're a little behind, always seem like they're fighting the system in a sense. And then finally, in terms of the struggle, is processing speed. Now, this is especially true. And again, I have another seminar just on processing speed, if you're interested in that more. But in processing speed, especially with kids with ADD or ADHD, we see things, something called slow cognitive tempo. And that doesn't mean that their brains aren't wired and moving quickly. What it does mean is that distractibility gets them off task very quickly. Now, this has become an epidemic this year because most of our kids now are online with school. And as we found out over this year, many school districts, or probably almost all of them, have instructed their teachers to say, you know what, there's so much going on right now. Maybe we need to get back to the basics, right? Get back to the basics, cover the essentials, and don't go too in depth. Don't push it too much. Meaning, our gifted kids and our 2E kids, especially those 2E kids that have such high interests, how do you engage those? How do you motivate those kids when they're dealing with basics once again, right? So the processing speed or the slow cognitive tempo jumps right in and they're distracted, right? So we see all kinds of kids, a lot of kids that I'm working with right now, every single one of them that is online is having issues with behaviors, so-called behaviors, because of this, because they're off, they're doing YouTube, they're not paying attention. I've even had cases where they just fallen asleep, right? Unless there's an adult sitting right beside them, helping them get through that process. So we got to look at processing speed also, in that is also adding to the struggle, adding to another layer to the fact that our kids are struggling in school. And especially this year, it's been really elevated. Again, I'm scratching the surface on some of these things, but these were the ones that I thought were pretty important in terms of understanding why our students really do struggle in school. And why they come against it. They come at odds with their teachers and even their peers. And of course, there's so much more to it. But this is the asynchrony piece, right? They have low social and emotional control and high intellectual control. Both need to be addressed, right? You need to address the intellectual piece. They need to be motivated. They need to be challenged. They need complexity. They need depth and breadth. And I've always said the depth and breadth. We have the Library of Congress at our fingertips now with the technology we have. There is no reason we can't go deeper and add more breadth for our kids, even in the COVID era. Allowing them to go so much farther and add so much more depth to what they're doing. And then the social emotional control piece, the language processing, the emotional regulation, that is all lagging in a sense for our kids. So that huge gap again, leads to the synchrony, which, if not addressed, leads to that dual process moving forward without accommodations. So yes, challenge, 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 make sure they're motivated and engaged, but also use those strengths to help them understand how to develop social, emotional skills so that they can really succeed in life. As I've always said, and you guys have heard me say this 100 times, the social emotional foundations for gifted and twice exceptional kids are the key to their success. We got to teach them metacognition early. All right, here's one of my favorite little slides in terms of looking and talking about asynchrony. As you can see, and I have no idea why the intellectual band on the bottom, there's two of them. That's a mistake, but it really is very typical in terms of what we're dealing with in terms of our 2E kids. So you see the emotional meter down at 8 years old, the intellectual meter down at 14 and a half, and then the chronological and psychomotor, which that can be anywhere. This is just an example. So you see that huge gap. Now, when I'm looking at our 2E kids, I always remind parents that you have to look at them in terms of their emotional age and their intellectual age. You can't look at them in terms of this case as a 12-year-old typical. You have to treat them from the emotional standpoint as an 8-year-old in a sense, and help them build change, bring that gap back together. As Dr. Matt always talks about, it's the tension between the two that causes the issues. So the closer we can bring those two together, the less issues, the less stress, the less anxiety that we're going to be dealing with in terms of our asynchronous kids. And the example we use here is researching Greek mythology, and I know all of you know this, and then having in turn fighting over the front seat with their siblings that might be 6 years younger than them. This happens all the time. I'm going to move more forward. So basically, in a nutshell, we have atypical neurodevelopment. We have something called hyperbrain, hyperbody, meaning the information is coming at them really, really quickly, and it's unable to, or it's not storing it either really balanced or in order, sequential order. That's another thing with processing speed. But it's also overwhelming that limbic system. So we have that intense limbic system, intense sensory intake. We have greater volumes of white and gray matter. Again, the white matter is the connective tissue. The gray matter can be found more in the frontal lobe, which is also really important for thinking and connecting and cognating in a sense. And then on top of that, the social emotional regulation. You can see in the limbic system, the hippocampus, amygdala, and hypothalamus, how that plays a huge role in terms of really emotional regulation, in terms of sleep, appetite, pain, emotional behaviors, long-term memory, all those things. And so if you have an limbic system that's overwhelmed, you're going to see gaps in terms of behavior, you're going to see gaps in terms of performance, and you're going to see teachers and other folks that are unfamiliar with this treating limbic reactions and neurological reactions to stimuli as behavior issues versus neurological issues. So you're seeing teachers, kids being reprimanded for things they can't even control sometimes. Anyways, hippocampus, emotion and learning, amygdala, that's the fear factor in the brain, that's the protective fight, flight, freeze mode. And the hypothalamus, this is something we ignore a lot. Blood levels of glucose, salt, blood pressure, and hormones. Very, very important when you have twice exceptional kids in terms of the diet and the lifestyle. We saw big changes in our kids when they started actually working out and eliminating sugar and things like that. We saw very big changes in terms of their behavior, their outlook, their attitudes about themselves and others, et cetera, because they were starting to regulate that hypothalamus. And that is something I think at some point we should do a webinar just on, at some point, on food and nutrition and the role it plays in terms of feeding the twice exceptional brain and body, because it makes a huge difference and just in terms of behavior. Also, when you're going in for any type of assessment, you want to make sure that those kids have that their hormones and blood pressure and salt and sugar levels are in check before you go in, so that they can really concentrate better. Again, I'm skimming the surface on this stuff, but I really think it's important to understand that if you haven't heard it before, that this is where our kids are at when they go into school, right? So this is what we see. This is what we see in their minds when they are stressed, when they're anxious, and when they're fearful, when they have certain stimuli take over and have melt them down, etc. We see the traffic jam in the brain. And there, when that happens, that cognitive function really tends to slow down, and you see a totally different child, a totally different student. And then that in turn feeds the gaps of those inconsistent performances, the behavioral issues, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of a, it's kind of intense in a sense. And as a teacher, if you didn't understand this information, it's a totally different approach to working with our kids. So executive function, one of the biggest things, the limbic system is also, responsible for executive functioning skills. The point here is we have to start teaching executive functioning skills very early, because again, if the limbic system is underdeveloped, we're seeing underdeveloped executive functioning skills in our kids. So planning, organizing, prioritization, you name it, go down the entire list. There's at least 20 of them, right? Those things are delayed. So we have high intelligence, but we have delays in executive functioning. So that is, again, inhibiting learning and inhibiting where our kids are at, meaning we have to really advocate for these kids because their executive functioning skills are lagging, because their limbic system is lagging and delayed, right? So you can see the cartoon, and this is a typical 2E kids. So I'm using a couple of these cartoons. So if you can't see it, I'm just going to read it for you. So Calvin's saying it. I say it's a fallacy that kids needs 12 years of school. 3 months is plenty. Look at me, I'm smart. I don't need 11 and a half more years of school. It's a complete waste of time. And then Hobbes says, how on earth did you get all the way up to the bus stop with both feet through one pant leg? And then Calvin says, I fell down a lot. Why? What's your point? Nothing, just curious. Executive functioning, right? High intelligence and yet struggling with that executive function. And this is really funny because when Sean went to kindergarten, after about a week of kindergarten, he came up to me and said this exact same thing. He says, Dad, I think I know everything I need to know to be successful in life. Can we stop school now? Right? When you have a kindergartner telling you that, something's off. So inconsistency. So we're looking in terms as teachers, but also as parents in terms of looking for those flashes of brilliance in the kids, right? Looking for those real areas that of interest that really flash in, and you've seen them, where they go to town with something. Maybe it's a project, maybe it's, I don't know what it is, but it could be something in terms of that brilliance, and you're looking for that. And as a teacher, I train teachers and say, you got to start looking for those flashes, those little bumps that make you wonder, what's going on? There's more to this child than I thought. And it's kind of funny. I do passion projects with a few kids, and I got 2 kids right now. They're 9 and 11 years old, and they're actually studying black holes for me. We're kind of doing it together. And the amount of information and the craziness in terms of what they've come up with and what they've, the questions they're coming up with and the research they're coming up with and the products they're coming up with, unbelievable, because they are both highly, highly interested and highly engaged, highly motivated to find out what is in a black hole. Why is the black hole a center of each galaxy? Why is a black hole considered to be essential to existence and to the origin of life, et cetera, et cetera? So they're going deep, 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 right? And they're both twice exceptional kids. And yet those same kids, if you stuck them in a science class and all he talked about is the basic of black holes, you may not see anything. So what does that happen when does that happen? Then suddenly you start seeing those discrepant patterns in terms of assessment, in terms of work, and in terms of behavior that I already talked about. So be really aware of that, especially when your child is in school. Are you seeing those discrepant patterns, right? When they're taking assessments, when they're taking tests, when they're having assignments due, when they're having homework due, when they come home and are exhausted and start lashing out at you, right? The behavior issues. Are you getting those phone calls, those cryptic emails saying, I think there's something going on with little Johnny here? Those kind of things. Look for those inconsistencies. And then the camouflage we already talked about a little bit. That's really, really can be a problem. It's a real problem even for the experts in terms of, it's funny, and I'll back up a little bit. When I was teaching at and designed the Navigator program, I had we designed it for highly gifted kids, but also for 2E kids. And some of my regular gifted ed teachers actually applied for the jobs. And then during the interview, it became very apparent that they didn't even quite understand twice exceptionality. And after many, many years, some of them 20 years of experience working with gifted kids, having master's degree in gifted, et cetera, and they still didn't quite understand the gifted child. So it's no wonder that our kids really move and start camouflaging themselves. Not only the peer pressure from kids, but there's pressure from the teachers as well in terms of performance, in terms of, well, if you're so smart, why can't you do this? Well, if you're so smart, why, are you just being lazy? Like I said before, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? It's the same repeated message that we hear over and over again. And once again, to advocate for those kids, we really, really have to inform our staff, our teachers, our educators as to what's going on in their lives. One of the things I do with clients is I ask them to write a personal history of the child in terms of development for me, because it really helps me to better understand who those children are so that I can work with them better and help them through the inconsistencies, help them through the frustrations and the anxiety and the stress, and develop coping mechanisms around some of the weaknesses. You really have to know these kids inside and out, or they will camouflage, and they will camouflage early. Like I said, already in kindergarten, we're seeing kids that are starting to camouflage because they feel different. They feel like they're out of place, and they feel like nobody listens. One of the biggest gifts you can give your child as a teacher or a parent is reflective listening, rational discussion without emotion. Meaning, a lot of times when I'm working with folks, part of the problem with the communication with their kids, especially when they get into their teens, is the communication starts ending up being very emotional. So there's so many feelings and going on, and you're not really making any progress. So having rational discussions and listening reflectively to what's going on, listening to their narrative. What is their school day like? What are their friendships like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, really, really helps them in a sense so that they in turn don't have to camouflage. They can be themselves. And again, this is going to take a lot of advocacy on your part as a parent, as a teacher, et cetera, because teachers talk too, right? And so when I train teachers, sometimes they're the only teacher in the entire building that understands this. And then they got to be that go-to person and spread the word, right? Proselytize in a sense. So the camouflage piece, look for it, it's important. Processing speed, I talked about this, slow cognitive tempo. Timed assessments, again, make sure that you're advocating for your kids if they struggle with any type of timed assessments, that they are given extra time. This is something that I think is actually amoral, unethical to subject our kids to these type of timed assessments that really don't show what they know and are able to do in a classroom, because they may have slow cognitive tempo, because they may be distractible, because they are perfectionists and need to review their work to make sure it's very accurate, because they're processing so much information that on one question they may have 6 different answers, and they have to figure out which one is the most accurate, right? This is why I call it the messy filing cabinet theory, and the fact that there's so much information in their brains. How do they sort it and organize it and then regurgitate it in a timely manner so that the teacher or the test or whatever it is can get that information, right? This is so typical of twice exceptional kids. So this is when you're also advocating in terms of processing speed, giving folks the information. And I have a paper I've written on this. If you want it, I'll send it to you, so that our kids have a chance when it comes to assessment. Our kids have a chance when it comes to paying attention, and have a chance when it comes to concentration, have a chance on a daily basis to be successful in school. And the prevailing myths, I talked about that already. One of the things we hear a lot is they cannot do the work. If they could do the work, why didn't they prove it, right? Oh, they're just average kids. Well, they're not filling in my class, so I guess there's not an issue. They're performing average, right? So they're not a problem. We see this a lot, and I hate to be stereotyping, but with gifted or twice exceptional girls especially, who tend to internalize more rather than externalize. The boys, especially the younger ones, will fight and flight. Whereas our younger gifted twice exceptional young ladies tend to be more freeze mentality or internalize some of the issues. Not all of them, I guess I'm stereotyping, So don't hold me on that one. But this is what we typically see. And so when they're appearing average and they're making it through the classroom without any issues, right? They're just another student X in row Z over there. They're getting 60s and 70s, maybe even 80s, and maybe a 90 in one class or another. They are invisible, right? They're not failing. So what's the issue, right? The issue is we are not seeing their potential. We are not letting them see their potential. We are not letting them access their potential. And that to me is a travesty. That is a huge issue, right? The other thing I hear is these kids are all the same. I get them all. Yeah, I know these 2E kids, they're all the same. And this is what I do with them. Well, guess what? They aren't. In fact, I've worked with so many of 2E kids and I've not met one that is the same as the other. Do they have common characteristics? Perhaps. But most of them are very, very different. And you got to see them as such. You got to see them as individuals. This is why I also really encourage the kids I work with to develop their own narrative, their own story. Who are they, right? How can we as parents and influencers in their life really validate that narrative in terms of who they are? Because that builds confidence, that builds resilience, that builds the ability to overcome the obstacles that they may face. And as advocates, we need to help them get through those bumps, big ones and small ones, right? 2E cannot exist, can't do the work, not true. They just need the right environment to be able to do the work. They need the right guidance to be able to do the work. They need the right person to work for, right? One of the things I've found in the many years I've worked with these kids is you need to build trust with a twice exceptional child to be able to get results. Trust equals results. Meaning, if they trust you, they know you're not going to be, skimming or, being fake with them or whatever it is we do with them, not listening the whole works. Why would they perform for you? Why would they go the extra mile? So building trust, having an understanding of their lives, really taking an interest in what they're doing. I used to spend, before classes, I'd spend at least 5 minutes. And even during class, I'd take the first 5 minutes or so, even 10 minutes to really get to know my kids. Beginning of the school year, I would take a full week to really get to know the kids. I wouldn't even touch curriculum. Then I'd be on the playground with them. I remember one school, my very first teaching assignment was in an inner city school in Michigan. And I had no idea what I was doing. Believe me, I didn't. And the one thing that I did do that was real positive is during recess, during lunch, I was in the gym playing double dutch with the girls, playing basketball with the boys. After school, in the parking lot, doing the same thing. And I really, really got to know the kids well. And I was in a group of 4 teachers. I taught history, American history. We had science, math, and social and language arts. I was the history dude. And there were so many kids, because this was an inner city school, that were basically F, 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 F all the way through. My first report card came out, and we'd sit down together as a team to look at them. I had kids F, 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 and in my class, they'd be getting Bs. F, 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 C, F, 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 A. And all the teachers going, what? How can, this kid is a, blah, 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 the language. How is that even possible? I said, well, because I know my kids and I've encouraged them and I work with them and I learn how they learn so that I can give them the right tools to be successful. Here I am, a first year teacher telling these veterans, I didn't last very long in that building, by the way. So at any rate, so that is the lesson, really, get through the myths, get through the stress, anxiety, fatigue. These things are all related, right? You see the stress and anxiety in your kids, you need to know that something is going on. Our kids aren't stressed and our kids aren't anxious for no reason. So they're up against it in one way or another, whether it's social, whether it's emotional, maybe even academic. So this is where you start digging. What's going on in your life? And if you don't have a real trustful relationship, you're not going to find out. I mean, we have 2 kids that are pretty nonverbal, and Amanda and Alex. And sometimes it's really hard to pry that stuff out, pry out that information that would enable us, in a sense, to really guide them and what's going on in their lives. And there was many times that we thought, oh, we can't do this. We can't do this. You know, we're going to lose it. I mean, Julie can tell you the crying episodes and this and that and the other. But the good news is, folks, your kids with support will make it. They will make it. They will be successful, whether if it's not in school, beyond. But we're doing everything that we can to make sure that we advocate for them and give you the toolbox you need to make sure that you are supporting your kids, whatever school environment they might be in, even if it's homeschooling. All right. And then here's a school. I thought I'd throw this. I think you've all seen this, the factory, you know, the school factory, clank, 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 squeak, 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 blah, 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 another school day. So school, again, can be one of those triggers. I know a lot of kids I'm working with, school itself, just the word school, the word education can be a trigger for them because of past experiences. So we need to make sure we have that fully developed toolkit so that those kids can be successful. All right. I'm going to take a little pause here to take a drink of water. Bobby, is Kathy with us yet? Bobby, are you there?
I am here,
Okay, is Kathy?
and I'm not sure that Kathy is.
I see her, so I'm just going to jump in. But who's got the hosting?
Yeah, Kathy is on the panelists, and I turned the hosting over back to you, Mike.
Okay.
I don't think, because I'm not allowed. So,
All right.
try it again. And sorry, folks, for the interruption, but I want to make sure. So, Bobby, while we're talking here, any thoughts in terms of what I just spoke, and any type of experiences or anything to add that you might
No, I was fascinated. I hope to add to what you said, but in a different direction. No, you added a lot to what I understand about this, so I appreciate that.
All right, Julie,
I'm hearing from Kathy that we can't hear her for some reason.
Yeah, she hasn't been made a panelist yet. So.
Oh, okay.
And I'm still not the host. So.
Is Julie or?
Julie is. Julie, do you want me to come over and do that for you?
Well, I actually had turned it over, and let me just go back.
At any rate, I'll kind of keep going here. So
Mike, I think you have to see if you can add her.
I am, but I need to be host to be able to do that. It's some strange Zoom.
So tell me, yeah, this is all new. So how do I get you back to host? Because I thought I already did that.
So you click on panelist,
yeah,
click on my name, click on more, and then make host.
I think that's what is missing, is there's no more, there's not the more button anymore.
Are you clicking on panelists?
Yeah.
You sure?
Yep. It used to be. Okay, the benefit of being married to this guy, I'm in the other room here.
Okay, well, I'm gonna
let me walk over with my computer.
I'm gonna keep going. Sorry, folks, for this little delay. Go grab a drink or something. Grab a drink or something. What happened here?
I don't know.
Oh, you know what, Bobby, you're host.
Oh, you know what, Bobby, your host.
Okay, how do I add Kathy?
So click on participants.
Okay.
Click on panelists.
Yes. I've only got 3. She's not there.
Oh yeah, so click on attendees, I'm sorry.
Okay.
When you see Kathy, click on Kathy's name, you'll see more, and then click on that and you'll see make host.
How about promote to panelist?
Promote to panelist, perfect.
All right. Kathy, are you there?
Now the issue is you have to make her host briefly because otherwise she won't be able to put the visual,
Right.
which is some very strange thing. So.
She is there.
Yeah. So
Well,
just
we'll
click
go
on
over
her
to
again, under
panelists.
panelists, and then make her host so that she can show her video.
Okay.
I don't need to show video.
Well, I think
That's
most
okay,
of them.
Mike. That's what voice is fine too.
All right.
Oh, to show video of my face.
Yes.
I can, yeah. All right.
That's what we need. So if you can make Kathy host, she can show the video of just,
Yeah, Kathy, go ahead and.
We're
is
all
your
learning
camera on?
this.
yes.
I
So
don't want to be the host though.
you don't have to be the host. You can make us host back when you're done.
Yeah.
Okay, so get your video, Kathy. Start video on the bottom
There she
There
is.
she is.
left.
Hi, Kathy.
There, okay.
All right. So sorry, folks, for that little delay.
Now turn it back, the host back over to, you want to be host, Mike or Bobby?
Doesn't matter.
How do I do
Please
that?
let Bobby still be host, or Kathy. When we get to your slides, we'll make sure.
Kathy, tell her how to make Bobby the host.
You know, let me
Tell Kathy how to make Bobby the host. Okay.
let me continue, and you guys, and we'll do this. Let me get through my slides, then we'll take a break briefly, and then I can get Kathy host, or have Kathy to help.
Okay.
Right? So we're not wasting any more time.
Or,
folks-
or just allow me to share slides and that'll work for us too.
Yeah.
Yeah, let
Sounds
Bobby
good.
share slides.
All right. But then I think, yeah, that'll be
Go
fine.
ahead and finish up, Mike.
What time do we have anyways? I don't have my phone.
It is 6:47 my time, 5:47 your time.
So, all right, folks, I'm just going to go through this fairly quickly. And again, you'll have copies of this so that you can look at it a little more closely. This is just cognitive strengths versus needs, typically when we talk about twice exceptional kids. So you can see on the left-hand side, verbal, spatial abilities, problem solving, background info, vocabulary, making connections, blah, 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 blah. And then the challenges. What we see with these kids is memory, short-term memory, rote memory. That's always, again, that goes back to that sluggish cognitive tempo. Executive functioning, which I talked about. And some of you are actually on our executive functioning webinar with Seth Perler way back in November. So go back to that. Processing speed, we talked about that at all. Working memory, similar to processing speed. It's just a little bit different, and Bobby and Kathy can kind of talk a little bit more about that. Language, word retrieval organization. Also in terms of language, to be able, the ability to find words that describe the depth of emotion and feeling. Again, back to those word walls I used to talk about. When we give our kids word walls, they can communicate feelings and emotions in a much better way rather than expressing physically their emotions when they get frustrated. So what I mean by that is sometimes sad doesn't do it, right? I'm not sad, I'm melancholy. I'm not sad or I'm not happy, I'm ecstatic. They need to access the words to be able to communicate what's actually going on inside, because the depth of emotion and feeling is really sometimes hard to verbalize. Auditory and sequential processing. So those can be some of the challenges that our kids faced in terms of cognition, right? So mathematics, we'll go through this, look at on the left side. Because you have strong grasp of the concepts and think logically or even symbolically at high levels, because you have all those great skills, it doesn't mean you have some of the basic skills like computing, retaining, recalling, processing sequentially. This can be a really difficult thing for our kids. Short quizzes along the way with, and I need to change this, versus the lengthy assessments, right? So a lot of times when we scaffold shorter quizzes for the kids, they tend to do better than tackling a lengthy assessment where they need a lot of scaffolding. And also if they're timed, forget it. I'm not going to go into that diatribe again. Reading, listening comprehension. Yes, they can do quite well. They can make lots of connections, right? Many have a real high level vocabulary background. In fact, our real high level vocabulary kids, the kids that score really high in this area, are generally seen and identified in terms of gifted programming because they can express at a very high level and people are impressed by that, right? They can converse at a high level. They can be leaders. They can be all those things, right? But it doesn't mean, but then you take the opposite where you have the kid that's really a visual spatial processor and really high in that, but may not have that vocabulary or background. Those are the kids that we sometimes lose, et cetera, et cetera. You add working memory, you add processing speed, fluid reasoning with, fluid reasoning to me, not so much, but processing speed and working memory, especially, you add those scores in, you see some real heavy discrepancies, and that can disqualify them from regular gifted programs. Again, high level vocabulary knowledge, applying that shared knowledge, grasping themes, concepts, main ideas, very good at these things. But look at what they can struggle with, right? Some of those basics again. Phonetics, decoding, oral reading, memory. Again, that's that recall piece. You tackle and if you're in a language arts class and already it's a struggle, you maybe have a kid that's with dyslexic or dysgraphic or whatever, it's already a struggle, and maybe they don't even have an interest in what you're reading about, that memory is going to go out the tube, right? That working memory, that comprehension might even go out the tube because they just aren't interested in what it is that you're doing. Writing. Oh, we have some of the most creative and gifted writers. I'm working with a young lady right now. The stuff that she produces in terms of artisticness and creative writing is unbelievable, but she won't do the work. She is very consistent. She gets away with a lot at her school because she can verbalize very colorfully. But when it comes to tracking progress in terms of her knowledge, what she knows and able to do, she refuses. So there's another issue going on there, right? So the school is really struggling. How do I, what do I do with this young child? At any rate, so highly creative, but maybe challenged in terms of representing ideas on paper, applying basic skills. A lot of gifted kids don't like personal handwriting. Holding the pencil can be awkward. Capitalization, punctuation, these are all skills that take time. You need to slow down your process to be able to do these things, right? That's something we have to train our kids to do. We have to build stamina around that. It's the same as those kids that in mathematics that just want to jump to the solution because I already know the problem in my head, right? But that's not going to benefit anyone except for themselves. So sometimes our kids have to slow down and show their work. But it doesn't mean they got to show their work 40 times in a row. They show their work once or twice, show they've mastered, they can move on. Organizing notes, again, executive functioning, right? Visual organizers, that it can even be a challenge for some of the kids. What is important? What goes first? What goes next? What's more important than another thing? That's prioritization, another executive functioning skill. So a lot of these things, in essence, can be struggles. And thanks to Dan and the folks at the Summit Center for sharing some of these things. So thank you, Dan, even though you're not here. And so that brings us to the spot. So what to do? Where do we go with all this information about our kids? And then how in turn do we advocate for them? And especially know the laws, know your rights, know what you can do so that your kids can be successful wherever they go. Public school, private school, homeschool, whatever it means. All right. Now our focus for the rest of this is really more in terms of the public domain, private domain, in terms of knowing your rights, et cetera, et cetera. But, you can apply this in so many different ways. So I am going to turn this over in a sense to Bobby. And this is the advocacy toolbox. And I think it would be just as easy. What time are we at right now?
It is 6:54. When do you want us to stop?
Ooh, you know what? I think maybe we should we stop now and take questions, and then you guys can pick this up in 2 weeks in terms of these slides, because I think there's another.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Does
We
that
probably
make?
got another hour's worth here.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that probably makes the most sense, folks. And all three of us can answer the questions that you have. I see there's already 3 in the chat box. And then please make sure that you tune in next time, because there's some really, really interesting and really crucial information that you will need in terms of what Bobby and Kathy are going to share. And this is the stuff, some of the stuff we've been working on with our special interest group in terms of assessments. Bobby and Kathy have been very involved in that, me not as much. But we also had presented so many times together on this stuff back in the days. So the other pieces, as Julie just wrote in the chat box, we will post any of these. There's a parental checklist. Some of you already have that, an updated parental checklist. If you want copies of my articles on this particular topic, well, I will have those posted in there, as well. But let's turn it over for some questions. And after we do that, we'll go from there. And not next Thursday, the Thursday after the 4th, we'll be in February already. Craziness. And it's actually good on the West Coast here because we're so far north that our days are getting longer much quicker. So I like that. At any rate, and yeah, Kathy, you're in the same boat, being up in Maine. So at any rate, let's get to the questions. I'll read them off and anyone can tackle them. And first, let me check the chat box. It looks okay. Let's jump into the Q&A. I think the chat box are more asking for things. What book do you recommend for teachers who do not know about 2E kids?
Well, I can answer that. For starters, don't recommend a book right now. Teachers are so fried from everything that they're having to do with the pandemic. Our teachers, we were going to do the computer version, online version of the COGAT, and the teachers couldn't even deal with doing 2 hours of training. So teachers are very fried right now. And if you want them to learn about 2E, I think you need to give it to them in smaller bites with articles here and there. There's a good collection on the Hoagie's Gifted Education page. When things calm down a little bit and everybody is not so stressed out. I started Zoom school today at around noontime, and here I am still on Zoom. So I would suggest smaller bites for right now.
Yeah, I would suggest articles, short shots, but I would wait till May, summer, when summer is just around the corner and they get that nice little break. Then you can say, hey, what are you doing this summer? Well, we're going to do a lot of reading. Well, here's some books I recommend. Bobby and Dan actually have a chapter in Barry Kaufman's book that came out, what, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago? And then Susan Baum has To Be Gifted and Learning Disabled. That book I would recommend. And not to sound conceited, but the book I put together called The Inconvenient Student is a really practical. I wrote it with teachers in mind and kept it very layman's terms. I didn't go really deep into the issues, so it's a quick and easy read. And so that might be worthwhile. There's also articles out there, plenty of articles out there. But yeah, I would recommend those three. And again, I would wait, just like Kathy said. What do you think, Bobby?
I think so too. I'd like to suggest one thing. There's a checklist that we're actually going to be talking about when Kathy and I present. It's called the Checklist for Recognizing Twice Exceptional Children. And there's a specific link to it, but if you look at gifteddevelopment.org and just kind of scroll down the page, you'll see a button to press for the checklist for 2E kids. Print that out. We'll be talking about that. And that did come from our director, Linda Silverman, planning a presentation for teachers. And she said, what do you want to know about twice exceptional kids? And they said, give us a list of things to look for. So that's what this is about. It's not for diagnosis, but if you answer the questions and one area, maybe dyslexia or autism or sensory processing or ADHD really lights up, that's an area to check into further with evaluations.
All right, how can we help our child create their own narrative? She is 10 years old. Thank you. Well, creating a narrative can actually be tough because sometimes when they're that young, the narrative they actually create is the stuff that they've heard from you or the stuff they've heard from their teachers in terms of who they are. So what you really want to do is to have them think reflectively and in depth, and you can do them prompts about what makes, for younger kids, very simple prompts, what makes you special, et cetera, what makes you different. I wouldn't use the word different, but what makes you special? What is it that we should know about you that we don't know? Things like that, and keep it really trust based and use all kinds of mechanisms, because not only, I always encourage parents to do that, the nonverbal journal with their kids, because sometimes when you're talking to your kids, you tend to get frustrated, or, the emotions start coming out, and you're not really learning from each other. You're not really listening. You're actually having more of a banter. So I encourage using that nonverbal journal. But a lot of our kids don't like to write, right? So they can use different avenues, whether it's computer programming, or even I have a speech to text software where I talk and it writes for me. It's not always the most accurate, but those little things can help them out. But just encourage them to express who they are. Now, it doesn't mean they want to share every single little thing, but even the act of writing or logging their own narrative in terms of who they are as a person, who they are in the family, who they are within their school, who they are within the community, et cetera, can be pretty powerful even down the road. I know my wife Julie journals every single day, and she often looks back and it actually can be quite powerful. So to me, building a narrative really is building self, building a schema, and make sure that it's positive. Our kids tend to ruminate negatively, and there's a reason for that. We're not even sure exactly why, but negative memories tend to imprint themselves with gifted children much longer than positive memories. So you do want to make sure you have those type of discussions as well. But it's wide open. But let them think, let them reflect, give them that time, give them that space. And maybe it's the diary, like Anne Frank's diary. She sat down and had private time to write in her diary. So there's a lot of ways you can do that. Hopefully that answers that question adequately enough. You guys have any ideas in terms of that?
I don't know. I think I can probably weigh in more on some of the other questions right now.
Okay. So let's move on. In the interest of time, I have a 504 for my son. I don't think the school is following it, but I don't have proof. What ideas do you have on advocating for my student? And I think this is going to be addressed in the next session, but I'll let you guys jump on that one.
Let's say just a couple things, because I think Kathy and I can give, a dual-sided quick answer. If you want to pursue that, that's the domain of the Office for Civil Rights in the Department of Education. There are regional offices. You can actually contact them and talk with an attorney about that. You could lodge a complaint. It takes a lot of paperwork, but I think what's powerful about it is that schools don't want to get in trouble with the Office for Civil Rights. So there may be more attention paid. But I'm also thinking, and this is where Kathy comes in, that teachers are so stressed right now. Students are stressed. It's easy for things to fall through the cracks. Kathy, take it from here.
Yeah. And the other thing is that the 504 that you had before last March may not be applicable to whatever your school situation is today. A lot of schools are in hybrid, so that the kids are at school 2 days a week and they are in remote school 3 days a week. Some kids are totally remote. Some kids who had 504s that were working okay before the pandemic, there's a whole lot of other things that are going on. Kids are stressed. There are mental health issues. I read somewhere very recently about 50% of Americans right now are having some mental health issues, and that would include kids. So you can always call another 504 meeting. You're welcome to do that as a parent. You don't have to wait until the annual renewal of the 504. You can call a 504 meeting anytime. And if there needs to be different accommodations put in place because the nature of school has changed in the middle of the pandemic, then you can work those out in the meeting.
All right. Jennifer and Shauna have pretty much have the same question. in terms of diets and exercise and feeding the brain and body of 2E kids. I think that will be an upcoming webinar. And to be honest with you, I need to gather a lot more resources in terms of that. I am not an expert in terms of the specifics. What I know is that different levels of glucose and sugars and salts and even food dyes, et cetera, can really affect something called the vagal nerve within the brain, which in turn affects a lot of the nervous system in the kids, and it can have negative effects. You can have reactions, allergies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I need a little extra time. One of the folks that Julie and I are good friends with, her name is Joan Cass, and she's a certified nutritionist studying the effects of food and exercise and all this other stuff in terms of gifted brains and bodies. So I need to spend a little time with her and try to convince her that maybe we could do a webinar on that very topic, because I think it's much broader. I wrote a little bit about it in the book, but again, I don't feel like I'm an expert in that particular area. So, Will, that's something we need to, continue to keep going on. Do you guys see Mike D's question?
Yeah.
Let me
I'll
read
to
it for the recording.
Yeah.
14-year-old up for triannual. I guess that's it. Disability.
Triannual.
Yeah. Disability identified severe dyslexia, dyscalculia, ADHD, 90% vocab. Ignored, made it beyond the grade level with intensive remediation. Jumping into public high school next year, wants to enter a special program. Do we wait for the new school to reassess? No. Most important accommodations. She has no classroom experience. And then the IEP is coming up in March. So yes, do not wait. That's what I'm going to start off with. Go ahead, Kathy or Bobby.
Kathy, you first.
Well, if it's a triennial that's coming up, it means that the school is going to do a total reevaluation that will include all areas that go into that. That will be cognitive testing and achievement testing, and probably some checklists that look at sensory development, ADHD, a number of other things are usually part of that triennial. So you could have an individual assessment done outside of the school and pay for it yourself, but when you take it back to the school for the triennial, they are most likely going to want to do their own testing, or at least some of their own testing.
Which can be somewhat problematic too if the proctor doesn't have experience working with these children. And that is a
Correct.
huge warning sign for me. I'm thinking I put together a piece in one of my articles in terms of what questions to ask. I'd have to dig it up, but you really, first of all, you want to make sure that the proctor and the kid have somewhat of a comfortable relationship so that there's some trust, especially because these kids can be anxious and nervous going into those situations, right? And I think most folks would agree that you want to make sure the kid's as comfortable as possible. But if they don't understand twice exceptionality, you may have some issues in terms of how they approach the assessments. Because in general, when you're looking at special ed, they will take a deficit approach rather than a more strengths-based approach. And I don't think if they understand these kids, I think you're in pretty good shape. But I've seen some pretty messed up assessments that are really off, that you almost wonder sometimes, what are these people looking at? Or, what kind of questions are they even asking? So you just have to be really careful that, and make sure that, and the first question to ask them very specifically, how much experience do you have working with twice exceptional children or students? And if they can't even answer that or don't even know what twice exceptional is, then you're going to have an issue right off the bat.
And if you decide that you want to do your own testing, either before or after the school does their testing, then you're going to have to find somebody who is familiar with testing twice exceptional kids. And there are certain tests, among them the cognitive tests, that can't be repeated right away. So they would have to use different tests.
Well, and testing is our bailiwick, and we're a gifted practice. So when we test a twice exceptional child, we look through the lens of giftedness. Our first recommendations are for how to support strengths. Later on, we're looking at how to accommodate the weaknesses as gently as possible. But you need somebody, and you can get names from Hoagie's Gifted, Sang, friends at your local gifted association or state group. Ask for recommendations of people who have a lot of experience with Gifted and 2E. And because of their direction, their emphasis, they're going to spend a long time if it's necessary. We had one child not too long ago that a tester spent 3 days testing because there were a lot of difficulties with this child, and she kept, at it because she knew he was really bright and she wanted to document it. You can certainly do part of the testing too. Do the IQ test, especially with someone very experienced. An achievement test might be done, as well with a school psychologist. Other diagnostic tests, it depends. But the more you can provide that's with an experienced tester of 2E, the better it will go. And keep in mind that when the school tests, they have those records forever. When you test privately, you get to see them and decide what you want to do with them.
Yes, but it can be.
Also, your state Department of Education may have specific rules and checklists that they have to go through in the IEP meeting that may preclude some things being included in the IEP as well.
Yeah, and the other note is private testing can be a little more expensive, so just be aware of that as well. Valerie, any suggestions about how to work with a 2E student who will not turn on his camera or mic during the virtual learning day? Well, guess what, Valerie? I'd be doing the same thing. So
it's not just students.
It's not.
We had an NAPC meeting, and the
students.
whole bottom row of people were Black, and we never heard from them.
Well, I have lots to say about this because I have 2 jobs this year. In addition to, I usually teach GT students in grades K to 8, but they decided this year that we would only see them half the time, and the other half the time, I'm supposed to be teaching grades 4 and 5 in remote school, which involves seeing them for a morning meeting 4 days a week, and then they're supposed to be working on platforms. They would not respond well to doing only work on the computer. So I've come up with other things for them. But I got to tell you, in those morning meetings, it doesn't matter if they're 2E or not 2E. It doesn't matter if it's the brightest kid in the class. The cameras don't go on. And then I have to say, it's really hard to teach you if I can't see you and I can only see your avatar. Would you please put your camera on? And sometimes they comply and sometimes they don't. And then sometimes they say, my camera is on, something is wrong with your computer. And it just goes on and on like that. So it's not just 2E kids. If they want to participate, they do have to have their mic on or you're not going to hear them. Sometimes they have their cameras off and their mics off because they're at the meeting, but what they're really doing behind the scenes is playing Minecraft on their computer. And if I were in a classroom with them, I would be taking a look at what they're doing on their computers. And if they were playing Minecraft, I would stop it. But there's no way for me to see what they're doing on their computers. Now, granted, they're parents. At this age, the parents have a responsibility because that's how our remote school is set up. And the parents sometimes don't have any idea what their kids are doing on it. So I do the best I can. We make the expectations clear that they need to have their cameras on when we're in class and that they need to keep their mics on. But, and people, it's like, you know, in The Wizard of Oz, when Dorothy says, "My, people come and go so quickly around here." And sometimes it's just a matter of the kids don't want to leave, but they get cut out of their internet. I've been cut out 3 times in a class before that I was trying to lead on my internet. So it's, none of this is like ideal, but in the words of our former president, it is what it is right now. And you just do the best that you can to encourage them to be there and to have their cameras on and to use the mic if they want to talk. And some will and some won't, and some will get cut out of their internet. And it's just, you know, it's a little maddening, but if you think about a regular classroom, you've got kids who are refusing to talk, and you've got kids who are not looking up at you, and all kinds of things. This is just the digital equivalent. And in a classroom, I can go over to that student, or I can talk to them quietly or something. And it's a lot harder when it's remote, but you just do the best that you can.
I think the best option is to pray for the pandemic to end.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you, Mike.
Cynthia's asked, I asked for the checklist to be used by parents, counselors, etc. They are
I'll
resistant.
do that.
Can we do? And for my own, to be very short with you on this one, is I would ask them why they are resistant. This is supposed to help them. Go ahead, Bobby.
Well, I would agree, but I would also say if you're the parent, use it yourself. The biggest issue is that our children compensate well enough that many of their disabilities are invisible. So you use it yourself to explore the areas that light up with professionals who will produce a report you can take to the school. And then that can be considered for a 504 plan or an IEP. Short answer.
All right. Jennifer's asked, I've done the advocacy at school, 5-day due process, hearing pro, C, etc. Now in a new district, son in high school, trying to get to the school to help. Seems like a few teachers get it and are helping, but others have no flexibility. Quite typical. My son is failing and suffering, especially now with remote learning. Any suggestions on getting the school to be more flexible, especially now with remote learning? And then adding to that, her son does not feel very connected in school. How can we help him to feel connected? So that's a mouthful.
I'll tackle some of that. I think a lot of kids right now are struggling with feeling connection to school. It's been a really long time for them. Oh, I can't see the rest of that question.
Oh, I'm sorry. The rest of the question was really
I don't know
about.
if there's a way to get it back.
Yeah. Oh yes, I can get it back.
Can you get it back?
Yeah, leave them a little longer.
Here we go. See it?
Nope.
Click on answered. I'll reread it.
Okay.
Seems like few teachers get it and are helping, others have no flexibility. So how do we get the school to be more flexible and accepting with the remote learning? And then you already answered the connection, or are answering the connection piece.
Okay. I'm going to say something about high schools. Okay. High schools are, for all intents and purposes, often stuck in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They've been teaching things the same way. They've been teaching the subjects the same way. Even the subjects in time order through high school go back to the 1890s and the Committee of 10. And the reason it's biology, chemistry, and physics isn't because that's how science works. It's because the Committee of 10 put it in alphabetical order. So high schools are much more resistant to change, I think, than elementary schools are. And also elementary school teachers and middle school teachers, there's a big expectation for them compared to high school teachers as far as accommodations and so forth. A lot of kids are struggling with remote learning. I would advise talking with someone at the school who has the power perhaps to get some of those people on board. It sounds like if you had a 5-day due process hearing that there was an IEP issue going on there. So I would talk with either the guidance counselor or the special ed director. If there's not a bad relationship there. If it's in the IEP, they really have to do it legally. If it's not in the IEP, or if it's just a matter of not being flexible, sometimes a guidance counselor can help with that. Sometimes the principal can help with that. It depends on the relationships that you have with the school. A lot of kids are struggling. It's been a long time. When they sent us home in March, they said it would be 2 weeks. Ha ha ha. Here we are 10 months later. I think schools are better with remote learning than they were when we were all trying to make it up as we went along in March. But it's, there's no two ways about it. It's difficult. And I would reach out to whoever you have a good relationship with at the school and see what you can do. Bobby, you want to join in because you're the advocacy person here?
Well, I was just going to say, the things that we're going to go over, since they won't be for a couple of weeks, this is my book, and chapters 6 through 9 are on twice exceptionality. Chapter 9 is about acquiring services and the different programs, and a lot of legal clarifications of what's legal for schools to do and what not to do. And that's all in there. That has more than we'll be able to present. So if you need it, it's in there. And there's a lot on testing too that might answer questions about what would you need if you were doing some of the testing yourself. But more and more we see with twice exceptional kids that parents have to take the lead, that schools are not generally going to do it with our kids. And so it's not worthwhile to wait for the school to find the problem, or to wait for someone to say, we need to do this to help your child. It often doesn't happen at all. So I hate to say this, but I've taken the approach in advocacy of trying to empower the parents or the caring teacher who's working against an administration that is less concerned, helping these people know enough that the balance of power changes. For example, anything you can formalize, anything you can get the help of OCR on, for example, gets more done. So sometimes you have to do this, otherwise your kids are in peril.
Yeah, that's a tough one. It just is. The higher you get up in terms of education, seems the more inflexible they are. So, that's, I don't know. It's
but
really,
there are ways to do it. I know a mom who has a dyslexic, very gifted child, ADHD, all kinds of things, visual spatial learner. And she's the most amazing advocate ever. When she calls a meeting, she creates an entire PowerPoint. She gives everyone a notebook on her child. She teaches a class on what her child needs. And doggone it, she gets stuff. So you've got to know more about these things than the people you're dealing with often.
all right. Last question, folks. And then we're going to go, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thanks again for being here with us. Valerie's asking, how many days should it take to put a brand new 504 together for a senior in high school? I've heard our district say 90 days for an IEP, so it might be the same for a 504. I don't think it should take 90 days.
Kathy?
But go ahead, Kathy.
No. In my district, if a 504 meeting is requested, then the 504 coordinator sets it up usually right away unless some testing needs to either be done or to be reviewed. And then as soon as that takes place and you have the meeting, they type the minutes of the meeting, including the accommodations, right on the spot, and it's sent out that afternoon to the teachers and the parents and the child, if the child is old enough.
So the bottom line, Valerie, we used to do the same thing. It's based on when the meeting actually takes place, when the teachers or the folks involved in the meeting can be available for that meeting. And usually I haven't seen them go past more than a month in terms of doing this stuff. And so they shouldn't, your guideline should be 2 to 3 weeks, because 504s aren't that difficult to implement. They just aren't.
No.
And they're not that difficult to put together. So again, if they're having to do test review or new assessments, that might take a little longer. That would be the only hitch that I can think of.
Well, in 504s, it's difficult to turn down. All you're required to have is reasonable evidence of a weakness that keeps your child learning at the level of peers. You don't have to have formal diagnoses. You just have to have enough. One other thing to check, if you're not familiar with it, is the Wright's Law website, WRIGHTSLAW. Peter Wright and his wife and helpers put that together. And it's a very extensive special ed website. And they have a Gifted, a Twice Exceptional page.
We've got a couple of things over here in the chat that I would like to quickly address that didn't show up on the questions. And one of them is about voice to text. We had a couple of good answers there by Mike. I will say that if the kids are issued Chromebooks at school, the voice to text on the Chromebooks is very good. It's also very good on the iPad. It's not perfect, but what I've had 2E kids do is to dictate their work and then email it to themselves, and then they can go in there and edit it from there. So at least they're not having to type everything out at once, and it's a pretty easy process. The other thing that's over here in the chat is my twin grandsons won't turn on their Chromebooks, period. Laughing out loud. One teacher emailed materials to print, but expects them to be completed, then entered into Canvas by me, I suppose.
How often does that?
Yeah, well, this is something that's hard, even if you're not twice exceptional kid or twice exceptional adult. I'm suspicious that this group is so fried by remote learning that we have a generation of kids that aren't excited to turn on their computers all the time the way they were before the pandemic. My students have found some ways around the email materials to print out. I do ask parents to print out some stuff, but if they have a printed out assignment to do and then the person is supposed to put it into Canvas, I sometimes have the kids use their Chromebooks to take a photo and then just send the photo to me in Google Classroom. Sometimes I have turned assignments that were on paper into a Google Doc that I have to type up myself so that you can make each kid their own Google Doc as an assignment, and then they turn that in or they share it with us. So there are some ways around it. But yes, it's process.
I threw the red in the panelists, learningally.org. Actually, that should be Learning Ally, one word, ally, one word. There's some other resources that are out there that we'll share next time. Someone's asking about the PowerPoints. I am going to stop recording right now. Thank you, Bobby and Kathy, but we will again pick this up in 2 weeks.